I focused on the issue, why is government support needed for learning in the workplace? And because it's such a huge topic, I actually narrowed it down to looking at one thing, which is employer incentives. And for those people not from Australia who might be here, this is incentives that the Commonwealth Government provides to employers to employ and see through to completion apprentices and trainees. So this is just one example of government support that I'm focusing on. Here's something that's been going around during 2011. I think it started at the beginning of the year, and the ways the people that I've heard say this have almost always used exactly the same words. Some employers are really big, they employ lots of trainees. Why are we spending public money to subsidise their training? I heard it in my own corridor only about 3 days ago and was a little bit worried about it. So I'm calling that the myth, and here's the reality. I'm a researcher and I never talk about things that I can't back up with research evidence, so I thought I'd just use a couple of case studies from Queensland, since the conference is here in Queensland. It's a tale of 2 cities, one of which is Brisbane, the other one is Townsville. I did 2 case studies for a project on apprenticeships and trainees within 2 days. You'll never guess the companies I'm talking about here. One employed a large number of apprentices and one has had over the years a large number of trainees. This myth is only ever talked about with relations to traineeships, but my research showed, and I've done many projects over the years, but this was a really great encapsulating of the issues, that good large employers of apprentices, this is not to rule out small employers, but good large employers of apprentices, good large employers of trainees make just amazing investments in making the apprenticeships and traineeships succeed. So I've talked in this slide about their financial and human resources, the training infrastructure, the way they work with their partnering RTOs, and the way all this culminates in high completion rates and high retention for the companies and the industry, retention into management positions. And really all of this is, in an underpinning way, it's giving more people more qualifications, and it's helping the government and society with participation targets. Okay, a couple of weeks ago I had a telephone conversation with a couple of officials from DEWA in relation to the government's proposals on apprenticeship reform. And they said, give us some arguments that we can give to Treasury. I don't know whether they did or not, that's a different issue, but give us some arguments that can be passed on to Treasury about why the Australian government should provide taxpayers' money to employers to employ apprentices and trainees. And I sat down for the first time in probably a decade of researching this issue and actually broke down what I thought the arguments were. So I thought I'd very briefly, I'm not going to read them all out, but just show them to you. I divided those arguments into 3. Okay, first is the benefits to society. What we're actually looking at here really is, what is the government purchasing from employers when it's giving them the incentives to employ apprentices and trainees? So here's a list of benefits to society that the government is purchasing. And I thought I might just focus, because time is so short, maybe on that 3rd one, where we're actually getting increased participation of people from low socio-economic status and other equity groups who would not be getting qualifications if they had to go to an institution to get them. And that is just so important for Australia as a society. I'm not going to read them all out because that isn't time, but the next list of benefits is benefits to the economy. So I'm just again going to focus on a couple of them. The first one, I think it's a really important one in terms of straight expenditure terms, decreased need for government to fund training infrastructure. Of course, RTOs provide brilliant training infrastructure, but I know that many RTOs here, as elsewhere, would say they could not possibly afford to provide the infrastructure that employers provide in their workplaces for trainees and apprentices. And then I'm going to jump to the final one, which is the big picture economic arguments, which clearly is the creation and maintenance of a skills pool for Australian industries, and of course quality assurance for Australian products, as employers reach certified levels of competence. this isn't just something that employers themselves benefit from, the whole economy benefits from. And I'm finally moving on to the benefits for individual apprentices and trainees that governments purchase through the provision of employer incentives. So, for example, the apprentice and trainee is promised a job. That's quite important. They're promised normally and usually a job beyond the end of the apprenticeship or traineeship. So it's not like enrolling in an institution doing off-the-job training. The job is continuing. A number of other provisions there for the individual apprentice or trainee, which everybody in this room I think would be familiar with. So, it would be impossible to add up the cost that would accrue to government if the taxpayer had to provide all of this in a way in which employers weren't participating. So my message would be, thank you very much, on behalf of the Australian taxpayer employers. If anyone would like to see any of the research evidence that underpins some of this, then please contact me at the University of Ballarat. Thank you.